Hey folks, Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. It's Wednesday, January 17th, 2018, and I am happy to be here with you. And I am happy to be here with our guest today, who is a dear sister of mine for many years, and it's Diane Musho Hamilton, who I don't think many of you need much of an invitation or much of an introduction for, but I do have some new people. So I am going to share a little bit about Diane. And first of all, hey, Di, say hi.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Jeff. It's wonderful to be in virtual space with you.
Yeah, indeed. I like it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So what we're going to do today, what we're going to look at is this amazing example of cultural evolution in real time that we're seeing that was really kicked off just 3 months ago with the Harvey Weinstein thing.
It's been amazing.
And yeah, is this sort of cultural evolution in warp speed. But anyway, Di, I do want to tell people about you.
Yeah, please do.
All right. So Diane Musho Hamilton is a teacher of integral spirituality. And like I say, we've been working together since the Integral Institute days, where Diane was instrumental in formulating the integral spiritual practice that, you know, really continues to this day with a lot of practitioners. And she's worked with Ken Wilber and us. And Diane is a lineage holder in the Soto Zen tradition. And she is the founder and lead teacher of Two Arrows Zen, which is a Zen practice community based in Utah. She's a master facilitator of groups. And your program is called Integral Facilitator, Di?
Yeah. I did that with Rebecca Colwell. She's my co-founder. And yeah.
And, you know, I've worked with Di and I've seen her work magic with groups. It's really, you know, Diane, I've produced seminars since I was 25 years old. You're the best.
Thank you.
Simple as that.
Gee.
So, yeah.
High praise. I appreciate that.
And of course, I don't want to neglect to mention that you were the rodeo queen.
Well, there's that.
In high school.
Yes, indeed. I was indeed.
Yeah. So anyway, why we're here is to talk about this Me Too movement and just this you know, this cultural moment. And you wrote really, I think, a beautiful blog post on your site called "At Me Too" on perspectives, listening, and risk-taking. And I really did think it was beautiful. And let me just see if I can sum up the basic thesis, and then tell me how I did.
Okay, sure.
But it's, you know, it's basically just an acknowledgement that of what's great about the Me Too movement, you know, in the sense that these are my words, not yours, but it's putting the nails in the coffin of the patriarchy, basically.
Yeah.
And then what's bad about it is that it becomes dogmatic and destructive in its own way. And we're seeing that too, and we're seeing a backlash to it. And, you know, as integralists, we want to see all of that. And the solution to that really is integral thinking in a way, because, you know, just to use the basic definitions of integral consciousness is that it's the ability to hold multiple perspectives at the same time, which isn't so easy when the intensity's high.
Right.
So that's what you said, right?
Yeah, that's what I said. I mean, I think I would go one step further and maybe say that big social movements that are demanding social change in a certain way don't necessarily have the luxury to include more. Like, in order to really get heard about how outrageous these abuses have been, and how much, in this particular case, women and men at times have been subjected to, and that it's just intolerable. And you know, there's a subtext around the relationship of sex and power, because Hollywood is obviously powerful, and Harvey Weinstein is powerful, and Charlie Rose is, and Al Franken. But so that the social movements have to just sound one note, you know, and there's a certain way, there's a certain amount of momentum kind of just came up in a groundswell, and we're in a different place. Now, I would, you know, we've been working on reversing the subjugation of women ever since the suffragist movement, and maybe even before that. I'm not quite sure how it came into being that women were somehow not held as equals in culture. I don't know that history very well. There may be
Right.
people on the call who do, but so this moment of really finally getting some real genuine momentum around the experience of just the abuse of sexuality.
Yeah. Well, it's an evolution. And one of the ways I think Integral can help us see it is that, as to the question as how it came about, Ken points us out that men and women created these systems together that were functional for that stage of development. And women were actually invested in the patriarchy. It's just why you often see the mothers or the leaders in these honor killings, and that sort of thing. I mean, that's really functional at that stage, and that just continues. And what's happening now is
or even you could even talk about the way right now in terms of how on the right side of the political aisle, this issue is not front and center, and that the women are not demanding it. So when the women also are growing and changing, that this change can take place for sure.
And I think this really, it moves the ball in that, it's one of the theses of what I talk about here in the Daily Evolver is that we just have to get more friendly to fighting, I guess, because that is, the way forward.
Yeah, that's right.
But as you point out, we can, in fact, I wrote it down. I thought it was so beautifully said. Hang on here. Oh, I can't find it. But at any rate, you were talking about how the cultural conversation tends to happen in these big,
broad strokes.
Exactly. And they become sort of these megaliths of thought. And yet in our private lives, at work and with our friends and with our family, we can have a more nuanced conversation.
We can allow for more perspectives and more nuance to enter into the conversation if we can tolerate it. Yeah.
So what do you think's happening? How's our culture moving here? What do you see is the thing?
Well, I think that there's a trend, and we certainly see this in our practice, where there was a big injunction at the level of development for us to just simply be good. But as we're
talking the amber altitude of development here, the traditionalists, still to this day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. And so, a lot of people are able to accomplish being good, but at the same time, we have priests who are perverted in the background. We have all kinds of things happening in the background. And so there's a way that the whole domain of sexuality is kind of being surfaced for us to take a much more clear look at the dynamics that are really going on there. And so the gesture is a good one. It's kind of pulling the curtain back from the privacy that surrounded our sexual conduct and really taking a look at it, whether it's in the context of the church and the abuses by priests, whether it's in the context of work and the abuses by people in positions of power, whether it's in the context of our personal relationships and just the way there can be a lot of negativity where that strong erotic energy is. So I think that is what's really happening, is that we're trying to get more conscious in a very real way. Yeah.
Well, how do we do that in a work environment? I mean, there's, when you talk about being good at the traditional level, in a way, that's part of the problem, because being good at the traditional level is women being subject to men.
That's right.
That's the nature of, that's still the patriarchy. Still, it's not quite as brutal as it was at Red, but it's still very much in play, as you could see, Middle Eastern countries shrouding the whole bit. Yeah. So we have that online, and we're just at that stage of development where we have 3 different worldviews online at the same time.
Or 4.
Or 4, exactly.
Or
so 5 if you count Trump.
If you count Trump, I was just going to say the same thing. If you count him, women don't even exist for him. Beings,
Well, everybody's an object to Trump.
at least George Bush treated Laura with a tremendous amount of regard and respect. I mean,
Yes.
what you have with Trump is, I mean,
Well,
doesn't hardly have a sense that he even has a wife. That's much more
right.
red.
No, that's red. It's Big Daddy. I mean, Big Daddy has concubines, basically. You know, and if you look at that through history, that's the real patriarchy. That's red. But we civilize that, brush off the edges at amber traditional, but again, still male dominated. And then when we get to modern, it's like, okay, we're going to have our private sphere and we're going to have our public sphere. And in our public sphere, we're going to be equal. And so women enter the workforce, you know, and you know, we hear these stories of, and I remember it back in, there was a big article in the New York Times about, I think it was in Detroit, where these women were on the assembly lines in these factories. And, you know, they had fought hard to get those jobs. Those were great jobs back in the 60s and 70s. Women started coming on into those kinds of jobs. They were making big money.
Yeah, well, after the Second World War, they went into the factories and then they didn't want to go back home.
Exactly. And they were just, it was just endless humiliation. And I remember it. I remember how the men in my friends and family at that stage of living in the Steel Valley in the 70s, how they talked about working women and how they disdained that. And that's sort of the, you know, some of the last gasps of the patriarchy. My cousin's generation, my generation doesn't feel that way. Not as much, certainly. And so that's being navigated. And then there's the postmodern that comes online that says, let's become sensitive to each other. And let's really see each other. Actually, I think Green still sees each other as objects. You know, there's still a victim perpetrator. There's a lot of roles. There's race and gender. And there's a lot that Green holds online as precious. But I think at Integral, we really want to just see, you know, through as many filters as we can and just see the person on the other side.
Yeah, I think so. And I think an integral, so one of the ways we can think about it is, let's imagine for a moment at traditional, we have typical gender roles. Women are support roles. They're subject to men's preferences. They're adapting. And then we get to orange, and all of a sudden we see a lot of changes take place in the right-hand quadrants. We get to see a lot of changes take place in terms of pay equity, in terms of access to financing, in terms of being able to actually hold down jobs, move into positions of power. Then I would say at pluralism, what happens is the subjectivity of being a female actually starts to be valued. So there actually is kind of a weird rift in the feminist movement between attainments in the right-hand quadrant in the social sphere, which requires you a little bit to behave more, if we can use this language, some people won't, but to behave more masculine. You know, if you're Hillary Clinton, you've got to be tough and you can't have your sensitivities. And then Green, in a certain way, invites us to bring those sensitivities forward. So there's a question around, well, you know, let's look at all the ways that women are not just simply being persecuted in the right-hand quadrants, but actually are demeaned in the left-hand quadrants down. And so sexism is addressed at a real interior level. And I think some of the abuse issues are also addressed here in terms of just the impact, the negative impact. When you get to integral, you actually have the freedom of mind to see as a woman the ways in which you abuse and oppress others. Now, it's very hard for anybody at any one of those stages of development to really see the perspectives of the other, because if it's the first time that anybody's ever really listened to your history of abuse, to what you've endured in the workplace, to the kind of bullshit that you've had to put up with as a female, to now say, oh, now you want me to look at how I as the victim, I now become the persecutor. But for an integral state of mind, that's actually not difficult. And in fact, it feels even more freeing. Because you're not locked into a dualistic structure in which I automatically am victimized.
Right,
I have some power to see the whole situation.
Yes.
So that's just one little tiny way of thinking about
as
it.
I mentioned on my podcast or earlier episode, you know, talking to a friend of mine about the women who took Harvey Weinstein's deal over all those years. And benefited from it.
That's right.
And maybe they were happy that they took that deal.
And maybe good
let's
for them.
not forget that. Yeah, that was the system, and women were working the system too.
Yeah, totally.
But the system's changing.
Yes. And the system needs to change. Absolutely.
And the system needs to change. And, you know, I think of it even in Buddhist terms, that basically what we're doing is just shining the light on ignorance. You know,
precisely.
in a way, we're having the conversation collectively that so many of us get frozen up with when we're actually talking to our intimate partner.
Or we're trying to.
Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking, you and I talked for just a minute. One of the things that an integral conversation could include is, you know, in my post, I say, it's very hard for people to hear me say absolutely in terms of these qualities of abuses, absolutely in terms of the conflation of sex and power. Let's you know, and let's really listen to what people have to say. But if in the next sentence I say, and due process matters, and consent actually really matters, and proportionality matters in terms of, you know, I personally, this is my view, Harvey Weinstein, from what I can tell, was a predatory, very abusive man.
Yep.
Al Franken, for me, is not at the same level of that. And the fact that they both have this, basically, because it's a political arena and not a judicial arena, they're subject to the same outcome, to me feels radically unfair.
Yes, it does, indeed.
Personally, if I had been Al Franken's advisor, I might have advised him differently. Now, that will enrage some people. It would just enrage them that I would put that on the table. But I think we can, an integral perspective wants to put those additional views on the table. And I would venture to even to ask a question of you: how is all this Me Too, this kind of victim persecutor situation in relationship to sexuality and power, how does it play in the gay community? To me, that's something I actually want to learn from, because I wouldn't be surprised if, as a woman, I have something to learn from you guys. I don't know.
Yeah,
I really haven't heard a word about it. And the other thing I would say is, we're taking a lot of interest in the experience, the negative experience of women's sexuality, but we should also pick up the positive experience of women's sexuality in relationship to power, and also be much more curious about what it's like to be in a man's body around all this stuff. We're not even curious about that. Like, how do men subjugate? How, you know, sublimation is one of, Freud talked about it extensively, because men do a lot of sublimating of their sexual energy.
Yeah.
Let's get that on the table. Let's teach young men how to hear no. Let's teach them how to work with their sexuality. Let's teach women how to say no and be clear about it. And if you're going to take a risk and you want to go up to a celebrity's room, then be a little bit clear that maybe there's a, you know, why is all the responsibility on the male? I think we should share it. I don't want to disempower women.
Yes. Well, you mentioned that Aziz Ansari is the example I think you're talking about. We're all talking about and thinking about that now. Yeah. And, you know, it seems to be the limit. I noticed there's the New York Times was, op-ed was, Aziz Ansari is guilty, period, of not being a mind reader, period. That's their op-ed, written by a woman.
I think Whoopi Goldberg had a lot to say on that.
Whoopi Goldberg. There's a bunch of backlash against that. And I think culture's finding its limit, you know, that you can't.
But the damage is done to him.
I know. Well, yes. And we'll see what clearly damage is done to him. And this is unfair to him. And it's.
I don't know. I honestly don't. I mean, I don't think he's guilty of a crime.
No, that's
so. If we're not willing to criminalize this stuff, why are we willing to ruin people over it? If we're not going to criminalize it, then we shouldn't be ruining people's reputation over it.
Yeah. Yeah. So
that's a total hypocrisy.
Yeah. And you see culture trying to sort this out, you know, with Kevin Spacey is vaporized.
He's gone.
Woody Allen appears that this is his last little puff of smoke for Woody Allen. It's over for him now. All these people came out and said, I'll never work with him again. Yeah. And see, I'm giving my money back.
Personal preferences. Like, I think Woody Allen should have been taken down a long time ago.
I know. No.
So that's my preference.
Well, it's a messy process, this cultural evolution. And yes, there are victims, and your people sort of get in the meat grinder, and then it's sometimes
I don't think Al Franken should have been deprived his Senate seat.
But you know what? Here's my theory. Al Franken's going to run for president anyway.
You think so? I
do. Here's my thought experiment, and what I would advise him if he wants to. I went down. I paid the price. I said, here's what I did. I'm completely transparent, and you know what? I'm running for fucking president. And factor that in, and I stand exposed. I think that would be, there's something that's, that it could actually raise the sort of juice. You know, the Lord works in mysterious ways, Diane.
Yes, I agree. I completely agree.
I
Well,
just,
I mean,
you know, think it's possible.
see, part of it for me is I have training as a mediator. So as a mediator, I have to find a way in any room of people working on any issue to be for everybody in the room. I have to find that the truth in what they're saying, the partiality in what they're saying. I have to privilege the perspective that's most relevant, most important in that moment. And I have to create more room for more perspectives to come online. At the same time, as a woman...
Stop just for a second. That's such a beautiful description. You have to be for everyone in the room. I love that.
Mm-hmm, I do.
I just want to pause there and say that that's what you just said is a beautiful description of integral consciousness. Mm-hmm. You really do want to be for everybody in the room. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so go on. But then there's also this other thing.
I mean, personally, I'd rather not be for everybody, but as a professional, I have to find a way to be, otherwise I fail.
Right.
And then I have to find the partial truths in all perspectives, even the ones that I think are archaic and racist and backwards and primitive. But what can I find in there? Can I just simply acknowledge tribalism as a real thing, even though I don't subscribe to it or believe in it? Yeah, we love our group and we hate others.
Well, we feel the lineage and we feel the magic of our ancestors, and that matters. You know, there is something that's beautiful about that.
Protection, and you're a threat to me. Can I find that truth?
It's not particularly wide or broad. Yeah.
I have to do that. Then I have to find the perspective that's most relevant in the moment. In this case, it's the Me Too perspective that really has to be brought out and represented and heard, and we have to take it in at deeper and deeper levels and enact it. And then there has to be room to bring other questions onto the table. But one of the things that happened to me just in my own practice is I've been involved in the feminist movement since I was in my early 20s. I have a chip on my shoulder. I have my 3 brothers and my father, all of whom are fighter pilots and military trained. I grew up in an atmosphere that completely supported masculine values, so to speak, and my sensitivities as a female were never acknowledged, and I have resentments around that. And I have resentments at having to fight as a woman to be heard at times, or to have my perceptions respected. But I hope your audience is open to this, but I went into a ceremony when I was in my mid-30s, and I'd been divorced, and I was trying to kind of have my relationship to men recalibrated, because I had developed this kind of they're the problem mentality. Mm-hmm. And so I went into this particular native ceremony that I was doing at the time, and I just had a very profound experience. And when I came home, literally out of nowhere, my younger brother was in my yard and had groomed. I was a single parent at the time, and he had groomed my entire yard. And I saw him walking from behind my house, carrying this massive amount of limbs and branches. And I just saw his, this is not in a cliched way, but this just beautiful male, actually helping me and caring for me in a way that I just was not able to see that. Mm-hmm. And that changed my relationship. I mean, I just simply don't have that same kind of automatic sense that men are always wrong.
Yeah.
It's not to say I don't get frustrated. It's not to say that I don't see things that are wrong. That's just not where I choose to live at this point.
Well, and I also love in what you said that you appreciate that masculinity.
Absolutely.
Just as a basically a pole of reality. And then there's the feminine. And actually at Integral, we want to have those poles back, because that's where the juice is. Right. And we want to have juicy sex, and sex gets green and orange. We get all confused at whose power and power.
And it might be same-sex relationships. It might be transgendered, but there's still something in the polarity of catalytic.
Yes. Yeah. And that translates sexually as power, as the pursued and the pursuer. And I was just thinking that I wish I had taken a video of what was going on in my office here before we got on this call. And I'm watching Greg's 2 French bulldogs. And so I have 4 dogs here, and they're running back and forth. Then they're wrestling, and the one's humping the other, and then she's humping him. And then the puppy comes in and wants to hump. And it's I realized I didn't make a video of it because I didn't want it to be on my phone. It's
Did they
all
have
obscene to
consent?
me. But pardon me?
Hey, there's a consent app. Have you seen about the consent app?
Oh, really? No.
Yeah,
What?
there's an app now. I
Well,
have it on my phone.
I,
Someone sent it to me. Basically,
I
it's
haven't seen it,
a
but I'm
little
good with
legal
that.
contract app where we give each other consent for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And so you'll have it on your
Yes.
phone.
Well, I think
Oops,
what
hold
actually
on.
happens is when we talk about sex and what turns us on and what is and isn't, you know, what we want to do, what we put that on the table, it's better. You know, I think what follows is better than when we're trying to do that movie thing where, you know, we just have to fall in each other's arms and rip off each other's clothes and all of that cliche over and over and over in the movies. I'm so tired of it. But anyway, I find the Aziz Ansari story interesting because it does show that category of where the guy's kind of pestering and pushing, and the woman's an object to the guy, and the woman who doesn't want to be. You know, none of that's criminal or even close.
Yeah.
But
But
it's.
I can speak as a female of many occasions where I've been subjected to that really persistent kind of,
Yes.
and there is a part of me that's naturally receptive, so it's hard to kind of galvanize my push. It's also that I just want to have a nice meeting and I don't want it to turn bad. Maybe some part of me might be interested, but not this fast. I mean, I can really identify with how annoying and obnoxious it is to have to fight someone off like that, or to feel that you're just not able to kind of weigh in without like finding the part of you that can really push, you know?
Right. No,
So it's
totally.
hard.
And then you go home and you did more than you wanted and it still didn't work and you feel like shit. And, you know, you ask, what's the gay, you know, situation? It's kind of all of it in a way. I mean, because it's all still there. All of the crapola is still there, but we don't have the easy sex roles, you know?
Right.
And so I look back and I'm 60 plus years old. So I've had a lot of experience, mostly partnered, but I did have my times of not partnered and in the scene. And I have been the pursuer. I have been the pursued. There were times when it was really fun to be both, you know, I enjoyed both. There were times when I was the pesterer. And I can remember one situation where.
Predator?
Not predator, no.
That's too far. Okay.
Yeah, no, I never pushed anybody. I'm too much of a wimp. But I did have a friend who we had a sexual relationship and he wanted to stay friends but stop the sex. And I was rotten to him for a long time.
You're mad.
You know, yeah, I was mad and deeply wounded and, you know, that and acted out in a way that I even knew at the time, I thought, what the fuck, you know? But there I was. But I also get that thing where this Ansari thing, where I've been the pestered, you know, where I didn't want to, and you know, and I kept getting poked at, and I wanted to talk or I wanted to move away, but I kept getting aggressed on physically, and I grabbed and and I've also done that. There's not a lot, but a couple times I can think I was the pesterer.
Well, that's
so. This is all, you know.
And the reason that we don't have laws against that kind of stuff is precisely that reason, is that there has to be room for us to find our way. You cannot legislate that stuff.
Right.
But we do have laws against sexual harassment, and we do have laws against, certainly against forcible sex of any kind.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and that's one of the sort of
when
gray
people aren't
areas.
willing to file civil complaints or press charges, there's a certain part of me that thinks you have to swallow it.
Yeah.
I might be wrong, but unless we want to go to it, unless we want to return to a kind of Victorian age kind of way of being, we're in murky water right now.
Yeah, but
it's just that it just gets really gray in the exchange of human beings, and I tend to be somebody that just wants to be supportive to women's capacity to say yes, to women's capacity to say no.
Yeah.
And actually, that there are going to be times where that yes and no are blurred, and therefore we kind of get hurt and we hurt each other. And I want men to grow up and be well behaved, but I would draw a bright line between that which is an offense and that which is, it's hard to measure.
And that's what that brought my thought back. That, you know, that bright line of what's real physical coercion. And you know, Orange would say it's physical.
Mm-hmm.
Green wants to say that there's other
Well,
dimensions of I can be hurt emotionally, I can be lured in, I
well,
can be
that's
the victim of your grand,
well,
design.
in the case of sexual harassment law, in the beginning, the law was against quid pro quo. You could
Right,
not trade sexual favors for advancement.
right, and that's in the
And then
workplace.
it expanded to hostile work environment. And
Right,
that gets at more at what you're talking about, which is
yeah,
just an atmosphere of unwanted sexuality.
yeah,
Now, again, sometimes that's measurable. It's also that everybody would agree, and other times it isn't, and not everybody would agree. And again, it gets very dicey.
yeah.
So it's really tricky when you start to get into these more subjective perceptions around what's okay and what isn't. And unless we want to return to a really repressive environment, then we're all going to have to tolerate some discomfort.
Well, I think we're erring on the side of it being too repressive. Well, the men I know, and you talked about this in your column,
Yeah.
you started with this anecdote.
Yeah.
We're actually happy to sit back and hear from the women. I think there is some truth to that.
Yeah, that's fine.
But we also feel like we don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, I relayed the quick story of what happened to me downtown Boulder when I was walking my dog. And I saw another woman who had a little dog and it had a little outfit. And I said something about, "Oh, aren't you beautiful?" And to the little dog. And then, we were walking and I said, and to the woman, I said, and it's a cute dog too. So it was like I was making the compliment to her. And she didn't like it. Mm-hmm. She was not impressed or complimented. And I got a lot of comments from listeners who have all kinds of doubts around that right now. How do you compliment women, and do you? And what's happened for me is, and that incident was part of it, but this Me
Don't
Too
say
thing
you have nice breasts. Don't say that. Don't say, "Wow, that's a good looking booty."
I
Stay
have
away
said
from
that to some of my women friends, and they have enjoyed hearing it.
Well, that's different.
Yeah, that's different, I guess. Yeah.
Well,
Because they do it, I just have to say so.
In the comfort of your own familiarity, but we have to be able to make these distinctions,
Yeah. And I think the opportunity is to, what becomes integral is we want to include all of it, including that sexual polarity, and that, that power is a big part of what is a turn on in sex.
Well, that's where it gets even dicier again. Yeah, that's
and
right.
It just is. And if we could do that, I was just going to let me finish it.
Yeah, finish. I'm sorry.
We can do that in the territory that is, where it's an option, where it's an art form, where we're not gripped by it. It's not who we are. We have other options. But once we have other options, we have enough space in our consciousness, we can let that back in, and it's juicy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So what were you going to say?
And we're going to have to, people are going to disagree with our particular stances. I've certainly had women who feel like I don't take a strong enough stance around the Me Too movement, and I don't take a strong enough stand around, just males who are, basically opportunistic and, hurtful. Mm-hmm. But I just believe so much in our ability to say yes and our ability to say no. So like I say, for me, unless somebody's willing to press charges, I just feel, and like there has to be a bright line. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's just, we just kind of, we're going to all end up, the culture is I'll say this though, I think culture is very, very schizophrenic around all this. Mm-hmm. Because there's more sexual freedom and kind of a libertine attitude towards sexuality now in my younger students than there ever was when I was young. And yet there also seems to be this kind of fragility around it too. So like, I don't understand that. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, when someone has been abused by a parent or an uncle or a neighbor and they're underage, or when someone has been harassed at work, and, there's lots of examples of Harvey Weinstein with having women to his room who are just young people looking for work and opportunity. And then he just takes advantage of that kind of stuff. Is not okay. I mean, it's against the law.
Yes.
And it is for a reason.
Yes.
We're going to have to figure the rest of this out a little bit.
Yeah. So how do you deal with students who are having trouble with all this? I mean, in terms of meditation or communication or psychology, or where do you go with it?
Well, certainly quite a few students come to me with trouble in their sexuality and how to navigate these things, and also in terms of just their relationships, generally speaking. So I basically ask them to really clarify what it is they want, what it is they're wanting, and then to look at their patterning and notice the kind of patterns they have that maybe are, you know, as Robert Keegan likes to say, a competing commitment. You know, that, and one of the things, like with men, that with my male students that I work on a lot, is if you want to play the field, I don't have a judgment about that. What I have a judgment about is you pretending you're not doing that. And every person that comes along the way, I'm supposed to pretend is your future wife until 2 months later you're not with them anymore. So it has to do with being honest with yourself, looking at the patterning that you grew up in, looking at your own, you know, your own wounding around sexuality, the own places where you're caught, where you're giving double signals. If you're a person who's not able to say no coherently without feeling guilty or frozen or timid inside, how can you practice so you can deliver really clear no's and set your limits and then be willing to walk away? So a lot of it has to do with both your personal work and also some psychodynamic work around sex and relationships for me.
No, that's great. And, you know, I think some of that is happening collectively too.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, despite the fact that we lurch forward and then we go too far and then we get blown back and everybody's screaming the whole way. And, you know, and there's a whole media circus. Everybody's got a megaphone. Everybody's all worked up. I believe in that.
Yeah, I know you do. I like that about you. Yeah, you're always reminding me. What do we say? We say evolution is beautiful, but not pretty.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And, you know, the bottom line is, after reading the Weinstein story, for sure. I mean, I think people at all levels, at the cement plant back where I grew up, you know, to the, you know, halls of Congress, to Hollywood, guys are going to stop that. There's going to be exceptions, but there's going to be a way move to stopping that.
Yeah.
And then also, you know, the Aziz Ansari side of the spectrum, that men are going to get educated, even just reading that story, you know, and reflecting on it, you know, and women too.
But I miss Al Franken in his role.
Yeah. Well, again, my thesis is that we may not miss him forever. We'll see if we can get him back. Yeah. I liked Al Franken. I was excited when a friend of mine said, yeah, because, you know, who are the Democrats, you know, going to work with here in the 3 years? And he was one of the ones that when a friend of mine suggested him, I thought, yeah, that is just the right, you know, balance of gravitas and the celebrity and all of that.
Yeah, media celebrity. Yeah. Were you offended by the photo of him with the woman where he had his hands out? She was asleep or something, and he had his hands out like he was touching her?
Was I offended? No, I wasn't offended. But, you know, it would depend on the context. You know, if these were a bunch of people who'd been traveling for a couple of weeks and they're jokesters and all of that stuff. I don't think that was it, though. She was a journalist. And I do think he was pantomiming more than anything. And she had a vest on. So I wasn't too worked up over it. But I get where, you know, I have grown. And I see now that I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't recommend that. I think that that's over. But again, context matters. With close friends, you know.
And also, again, I think the danger is if we can't, you know, I don't know how she felt about it. I think it would matter to me how she felt about it. I think that if we tell men over and over they're not supposed to think that way or feel that way, and a comedian doesn't demonstrate it, it just gets driven into shadow and it's going to come out. Yeah. So I'd rather have it come out playfully and we can all acknowledge it's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
It's tricky territory.
Yeah. But I think we made a little progress in clearing the thicket.
Yeah. And you know, shout out to the women of the Me Too movement for taking a stand.
Yeah. And may we all learn and grow here.
Yeah.
So thank you, Diane Musho Hamilton.
Thank you, my friend.
For being on the Daily Evolver.
All right.
Good to see you.
Peace.
And thanks everybody for listening. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Jeff.